Dan, so excited to have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure. Happy to be here.
All right, so let's start right at the beginning of your career within Canadian tech. So I'd love to dig in as somebody who went through the traditional law practice route as well. Your background going from kind of Sullivan and Cromwell, Goldman Sachs, to ending up jumping into David Ossip's company Workbrain, and kind of how that all happened.
Sure. Well, actually, it wasn't my first job. My first real job, although it wasn't really real, was I worked for my college fraternity. So I went to Western. I was in a fraternity, and I kind of loved the experience. And I got hired by the national headquarters to kind of travel around. Sounds a lot more glamorous than it was, but it was actually a great startup experience because a lot of my job was recruiting people to join chapters or to start new ones. And in some ways, when you're 21 years old and you have to figure out how to convince a bunch of 18-year-olds to sort of work really hard for 4 years for this future vision, it is a pretty good testing ground for recruiting in tech in general. So, but yes, I went back. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to law school and business school. I spent a summer doing legal research, or at least for half of it. And then I spent a summer at Goldman Sachs and a summer at Sullivan Cromwell. I certainly wasn't like a real person there. I was just a summer associate. But I learned enough to know that that was probably not what I wanted to do with my life. I accepted a job at a consulting firm, BCG, but I was really lucky that David Ossip, who I had known, said, "I'm starting a new company. Would you like to help me write the business plan?" And even better for me was that my other friend, David Stein, who I've been friends with for a long time, who's now the head of Leaders Fund and then subsequently was my co-founder in Rypple. He also was part of that founding team with David. And I asked him if I could bring a friend. So I did. I got to bring a guy named Matt Chapman, who's now a partner at TorqueWest. And that was it. That's how I got involved with tech. And I'm really glad I did. It was a great experience working for both Davids, learning from them both, and all the amazing people who were part of that Workbrain experience. It was really great.
So you get into Workbrain pretty early. I remember in a prior interview you saying, I think you write some of the business plan for Workbrain while you're actually still in school, right? So this is
Yeah.
fairly early on. You decide that you're willing to take a risk, and I think you had explained it before that you kind of wanted more randomness in life, and that was a little bit of the differentiator. Do you think it also had to do a little bit with your youth? Like, I mean, what else do you kind of think that being an entrepreneur or working in technology was always on the table for you, or what else do you think led to that?
Yeah, I think it was involved in youth, but because of so if you think about an investment portfolio, I'm an angel investor. I just did a talk this morning with someone asking me about it, and the secret to, or at least one of the secrets, is you have to have lots of bets across a portfolio because it's very risky angel early stage investing. So you want to kind of diversify that risk by having a whole bunch of them. And the problem is in your life, you only get to live one. You can't live multiple lives. So the closest thing that you could do, though, is that you can try and do the more risky things sooner, right? So when you're younger, you can take more risk because if things go wrong, you've lots of times to make up for that, lots of times to learn from it and develop. And so I think for me, that was sort of the way I was thinking about it was, hey, I'm young. I don't have any kids. I have some, obligations, but not a huge crushing college debt load. The worst thing that'll happen, which actually I believe is the risk that most people really fear the most, is that I'll look dumb. I'll look stupid. I'll have turned down sort of a fancy, prestigious job to try this thing. And I'm older now, so it's hard to appreciate, but joining a startup in 2000 was not like the thing that everybody does. In fact, many of my classmates were like, what the hell are you doing turning down all these like offers that are, they pay a lot of money and they're prestigious and there's a path. Why would you join like a startup at Don Mills and Eglinton? And so for me, it was about the risk, but it was also about joy. Like there's just joy in being part of something that you're building and getting to build it and having autonomy. And, David Ossip was such a great mentor, and David Stein for just, letting me go off and figure things out, making lots of mistakes and kind of keeping me around and tolerating me. So that was a great experience.
All right. So I definitely I want to dive in a little bit because we've got a limited amount of time. So you work at Workbrain for about 7 years. It gets acquired by Infor. And then you decide to take perhaps even an even bigger risk in terms of starting Rypple and creating your own company.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard you describe Rypple as kind of an application of lean thinking to performance management, right? Annual performance reviews are as kind of locked up inventory. Can you
Mm-hmm.
just expand on where you saw that and kind of the genesis and the beginning of Rypple there?
Well, the genesis of Rypple was that David Stein and I were thinking about what we were going to do next. And I remember I said, like, are we going to get jobs? And both of us like, no, because by that point, we really didn't know how to have jobs. I mean, our last job was well, at least for me, was my first job, and it turned into a public company with, 700 employees. And I just didn't know how to do other stuff. So I thought, well, why don't we just try and do something together? And David, I think, felt the same way, and to both of our lucks, I guess, of working with each other. And so we didn't actually have an idea when we came in, but the punchline was we recognized that at around 2000, that the traditional model of doing sort of a once a year performance review was not that helpful. And I had done some work on lean software at Workbrain, trying to think about our process flow, and learned a little bit about Taiichi Ono and the lean production system. And the basic idea is just believe in human beings, right? And give them feedback and give them autonomy. And so we're like, well, that's kind of funny. We want people to get better, especially in knowledge work jobs, but we tell them once a year. And it's kind of like classic non-lean. We batch up all the feedback. By the time we give it to you, it's not useful anymore. And so we were just thinking, like, what could we do to give people feedback right away in real time? And, the metaphor of kind of Twitter or social made a lot more sense. And so that's why we built a performance management tool that had a feed and that let people give badges to each other and things like that. We just thought that model would be more effective. And we were right in that at the time, our first customer base was all these new tech companies, companies that today are seen as giants, but at the time they were startups. Facebook, HubSpot, LinkedIn, Living Social, Eventbrite, DocuSign. These were all customers that we worked with when they were just startups, because they wanted something new. And we thought that what we had was appropriate. So that was how kind of lean thinking informed what we were doing at Rypple. Yep.
Yeah, and I'd love to. And the reason that this topic is important, I think, because talent and people are so critical to early stage startups. You get maybe 8 employees to run the whole company and the bit of seed funding that you have. And one of my all-time favorite articles is your article about being a good early stage employee and level 5 versus level 1 type thinking. And
thanks.
You kind of labeled them as, a GPSG. So I'm kind of wondering as well as like, how do you look at some of the other gaps in people management for workplaces now after everything that you've seen? You started Rypple quite a few years ago. Are there any other things that you've kind of looked at and said, maybe I don't have time to start a company around this, but geez, I really wish people paid more attention to employee retention or the recruitment system or transparency or surveys, like anything else that's kind of popped up for you over the past 5 or 6 years?
Look, first of all, since we sold Rypple, I mean, it's funny, people don't realize this, but we tried to raise money from like 17 different Valley venture funds. And we had that customer list I just mentioned. We also had Spotify. We had gone from like 0 to about $1 million in ARR in about 3 years. And we couldn't raise money because people were like, we don't believe in this bottom-up model. We're not really sure that this makes sense. Will anyone buy from you? I mean, today it would be a different story. But at the time, we really were having a hard time, except for actually, I will say, Georgian Partners in Canada finally stepped up. By that point, we were in the sort of Salesforce game of selling the company. The reason I say that is because a lot of people have innovated after us. There's the Fellow app in Ottawa. Aiden is an amazing entrepreneur and he's building a great app. There's BetterWorks, there's Lattice, there's Reflective. There's a bunch of people who've taken where we sort of poked around and gone to the next generation. So I think those are good products. I think for me, there's 2 areas where I'm curious. I don't know if I would start a company. I think, so one is just emotional latence. Like a lot of like performance and work is people getting along with each other emotionally and being able to communicate. And that's still a hard problem. It's interesting. Amazon has this new watch that kind of tells you how you were emotionally during the day. Like, were you angry? Were you not? It has a lot of sort of surveillance-like implications that are creepy, but I do think there's some value in giving feedback to people based on what they write, what they do, about the way that they're expressing themselves to other people. Because once that trust or feelings of hurt feelings come in a team, it starts to impact performance very quickly. But it usually only manifests itself weeks or months later. And if you could shorten the cycle, that would potentially be a really powerful breakthrough product. I think, I'm not sure it would be a great business. And then the other one is something that I definitely see more of happening today, but was something, in fact, part of the reason why we wanted to sell the businesses to Salesforce was like the integration of human performance with like business performance, right? And we live in this sort of API driven world, and it just still seems to me that there's like two solitudes. There's like the HR data set and HR world where like, this is how you did, and it's somewhat subjective. And then there's like, what managers really use to run their teams, right? Whether you're a customer support agent using, whether it's Twilio or Gainsight, or if you're a salesperson using Salesforce or HubSpot, the CRM system. And so the real data about how people are performing is in those systems, the production systems. But it still seems that there's a gap between that and HR performance. Those are two areas that I think about.
Really interesting. And then the other piece, obviously, is we're in a bit of a, I don't want to say, I mean, a crisis around the pandemic, but there's obviously an issue with employee engagement, right? So that the Hays Canada survey in 2020 came up that said 49% of respondents said that they're ready to quit their job, up from 40% in 2019. And a lot of that has to do with the remote work and just internal pressures and other things going on in the home right now. But in part, I guess we should give a little bit of context to what Helpful was and its play around engagement. And then I'm curious to see your thoughts on engagement during a world now where we all work remotely. Fingers crossed that it won't be forever, but for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, so Farhan Tharwar and I started Helpful, same sort of thing. We were like, hey, we don't really have an idea, but let's come up with a company. We like working together. And we iterated through a bunch of different opportunities. One was around basically like a super intelligent employee directory. The thesis was people use directories all the time, but they haven't really changed in 20 years. And what you're really looking for when you go to a directory is not really person's contact information. You're trying to find an answer that person can tell you. Usually it's like, who do I know who can help me understand this? Well, what if you just get that answer when you go there? A second thing we worked on at Helpful was asynchronous video messaging, which was a good lesson in how timing is important. Because today, when lots of people are working remote, you have lots of distributed teams. Asynchronous video, Zoom obviously is incredibly powerful, but also burdensome, especially when you're not in the same time zone. And so asynchronous video has a space and a place, and we thought that would be a really powerful way for people to communicate. At the time, it wasn't as much of a pain point. It's much more of a pain point today. And I can tell you lots of VCs have pinged me saying, hey, would you be interested in restarting that company? Can we buy the code that you built? And no and no is the answer in both cases. I'm very, very happy at Shopify. I think we're all learning how to do a new style of work, a new way of staying engaged and caring about it. But while it certainly makes a huge difference to have human contact, being around people, connecting with them, I don't think in any way it is required that companies need to be in person to have a highly engaged workforce. There's enough examples now that we know of companies that do work this way. Also, I'm not really sure that most companies, at least tech companies, weren't already remote. I mean, from my time at Salesforce and certainly my time at Shopify, most of my meetings, most of the time would be like, oh, I got to go find a meeting room so I can go into a room. Maybe there's someone physically with me, but most of the time it was already a video conference with someone in another building or in another city. So I'm not sure if there's that much difference. Like you were already there. I mean, what you miss is the bumping into the hallways and the staircases and the lunch times. And that definitely is something that people feel. I'm not sure that's 100% the only thing that you can offset for engagement. I mean, I think I'm really lucky to be working at Shopify. It is a super innovative company. It puts a ton of energy and has put a ton of energy into like reimagining work in the fully distributed, we call it distributed by default. I think it's kind of exciting, actually. It's kind of an exciting place, an exciting world to be in as we reimagine how people can stay connected. I mean, another example would be like, look, we kind of have Swiss Army knife cameras, right? Like you have a software platform, a computer, and kind of a crappy little camera that's in there, but I can notice that you've got a mic on. And so you do wonder whether like the video phone is actually going to come, like a dedicated physical device for video, audio that like really is more immersive. And I have a hunch that that's going to happen. It's on its way.
just to, and I'd love to ask a little bit more about Shopify. We'll dive into that in just a minute. In one of your Medium articles, I mean, I just know a bunch of tech leaders, whether they're actually a founder CEO or just managing a shorter distributed team, that maybe do these employee surveys, right, and get the information in a latent way that their workforce is less engaged come December. One of the interesting things in one of your Medium articles was just having a leader more present helps with engagement. Like for a company that's maybe struggling with pushing people in Q4 or really rallying the workforce together now, like what sorts of advice would you give to a manager in terms of being more present or ways to be? I guess one of the biggest issues with just pure video and distribution is kind of like almost the lack of empathy that comes with it. Like those moments that you mentioned bumping into each other in the hallway, they're small moments, but they're usually the moments where you get to check in about non-work items. And I guess that's really one of the things that's missing when you just pop into a call and right away start talking about work. But that's just,
Yeah, but you just hit it on its head. Like I try and trust me, as a younger person, I didn't do this. I was not winning any awards for being Mr. Sensitive for my career, no doubt. But I've learned that you can't just say let's get down to business. And it was certainly even more today that you start a meeting. It's just short-term thinking. You're like, I only have 30 minutes. We have to talk about everything. Let's just get into it. But that's false. If you spend 5 or 10 minutes connecting with a human being, the likelihood of your next 20 minutes are going to be productive goes way up. And more importantly, the likelihood that that person is going to do the thing they said they were going to do. I'll follow up with you. I'll find out that information. I'll figure out how to help you with that. It's going to be so much more likely if they like you, if you're connected, if they think you care about them and you genuinely do care about them. And I think that's funny. Most of the time, I think people do care, but they don't take the time to make sure people understand that by spending that first 5 minutes. So yeah, in a world we live in today, you just got to get on and really make sure you spend some time chatting. I think the second lesson is just vulnerability, right? Being honest that you're struggling too, that it's hard, is, to your point, a great way to bring empathy. I had an experience with a team recently that was like, they were frustrated. They were like, we're confused. We don't know what's going on. Why are you giving us this misdirection? It feels like. And, I thought about it. First, I was like, oh, this is annoying. And then it didn't take me long to realize, I'm like, oh, you know why they're confused? Because I'm confused. And so instead of like coming up with some bullshit, I just got on with the team and one-on-one and with the team. I said, look, I understand the past week has been weird. It's because I don't know what we're supposed to do. I'm not really sure. Let me explain it to you. And like the second I said that to people, they were like, oh, well, we understand it. Let's help you. Let's help you figure it out. And let's work together to figure it out. So that hasn't changed. That you can do that over video. You can do that over the phone. It's not about the medium. It's about what you say and how you say it with, genuine truth and vulnerability, being honest. Like, this is what's happening. Last thing I'd say is I found that like the work from home environment, I mean, no question, it has a lot of stresses, but one of the things that I found really pleasant actually was that you started to see people as humans because you could go into their house. Right. I mentioned I had this job in the fraternity. One of my jobs was to like knock on doors in dorms. It's called dorm storming. And you had to like literally knock on the door and open the door and be like, hey, let's chat. And I learned this trick that the best way you could build a bridge is like look on the walls. People kind of barf their personality onto the walls. And so I don't know anything about sports, but I know about music. So I just like look at the CDs. At the time they were CDs. I guess today it's harder to do this, but I would like ask questions. Oh, you like this? I like that. What do you think about this? Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but it was like, how do you find mutuality and commonality? So the thing about people at home is you can look into their house, you can look into their life, you chat about their, what's going on in the background. I noticed you got a new table, how, and then you see the dog or the kid. And that, by the way, the kids are the best, right? You're like, oh, that's a person too. They've got their own struggles, their own family, their own home issues, their own kid issues. Those are things that help tighten the bonds of empathy, recognizing that we're all just, humans working together. Whereas the sort of overly formal, we're just at work, this is my work self, I don't talk about what happens at home, that never worked for me. And I think maybe that's sort of a bright side potentially of what we're going through now.
Yeah, I think the last piece is such a great tip, right? Because if somebody's wearing something new or is part of something in the office, you can comment on that, but now you can physically see into their home and make comments on things. All right,
let's. By the way, that music trick still works. Like every time I see someone with a guitar in the background or keyboard, like that's what I want to talk about. And it's good. It's a good thing to talk about.
All right, let's go into Shopify. Obviously, so many are enamored by Shopify. Recently, Canada's most valuable company just surpassed RBC. I mean, just this year alone, right? So Shopify has announced a major partnership with Walmart, a global digital by default strategy for working, and a major partnership with TikTok, all within the last few months. These are all huge strategic decisions. And I think I've heard you say before that the best companies are the companies that are going to win in the next decade, or ones that can make massive decisions or bets really, really quickly on data. Like, based on your take, what is it at Shopify? Like, how is Shopify able to make these decisions faster? Like digital by default, I know companies that are like 20 people that haven't made that decision yet. So how are they able to make these huge decisions much faster than companies maybe even like 1/10 of their size?
Well, I mean, there's lots of reasons, but it does start with our leadership. Harley and Toby are quite amazing human beings. They are next level CEOs, long-term thinkers, genuinely good human beings, like really nice people. And they've been doing this for a while. And I think that's where it starts, right? I think if you have long-term view and long-term vision, you can do things and you have the confidence to take bets. I think a second thing is that they've been like training Harley and Toby and then the whole company training for this for a long time, insofar as one, kind of a company values to be anti-fragile, right? Like to thrive on change and to throw chaos monkeys into the work sometimes. Where I mean, I don't know if this is apocryphal or true, but apparently Toby used to walk around and just like shut off servers every once in a while, just to get the team ready for like, hey, this might break. Are you ready for that? And so the change of Shopify has created a culture where people are used to changing. It happens. I won't say it's been 100% easy, but people are probably much more primed to do that, much more primed to make confident decisions. And I think the other thing is just clear thinking. The greatest gift that Shopify gave was certainty to people, because by making a decision early on and saying, this is what we're going to do, you can now plan your life. I think it's allowed people at Shopify to have a huge advantage in terms of like, where do they want to live? What do they want to do? They don't have to live in limbo about whether we are going back or aren't going back. They just know. And that allows people certainty to plan. So making a decision allows that to happen. The other thing is, it's important to remember Shopify is not new to remote work. I mean, I think a significant percentage of the workforce is our support teams, and they've been remote for always, people working from home. So we have a lot of expertise built up around how to make that effective. We've always had a multi-city structure. So people were always working between cities and understood, like I said, to be on that video screen. And in fact, I think, again, it's before my time, Shopify even did a month-long like drill. Just everyone went remote for a month, just to create empathy with people who are working remote, or for merchants who are working remote. So yeah, I think it was better placed and well-placed and ready to do this. I feel lucky and privileged to be here.
So awesome. Okay, so I'll get you with one final question, basically around the Canadian ecosystem. You gave a talk a few years ago, I want to say about 3 years ago, that I loved, about the Canadian border being an imaginary line that's not going to save you from being destroyed by companies elsewhere. And this is true, especially with technology, right? If you launch a technology company, it's fundamentally different. You're going to be competing globally with everybody, and in most cases, especially with some particular things. What do you see now over the past few years since you've given that talk for Canadian companies? Where are we still lagging, and what do you hope to see in the next 3 or 4 years from Canada?
Can I just say that you have really done your homework? Like, you have dug through the internet archives of all the talks and blog posts and speeches, man. It's like a memory lane trip here. So good on you for that. Yeah, so I gave a talk saying once the border is an imaginary line, which it is. It's literally an imaginary line. I mean, it's real insofar it has real impacts and people treat it really, but you walk to the border, there's no magic something. It's just, we all think it that it's there. And I was simply trying to make the point that your mindset of how you see opportunities is one that is defined by these sometimes imaginary barriers, and that we should encourage entrepreneurs to think beyond that. I think, by the way, that talk was the improvised talk I gave at. Yes. I gave the audience a choice. Yes. Should I just make this up?
They chose the improvised
They
talk
chose the
over
make
the
it up
slide.
talk. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. What do we have today? I mean, it's just such a different world today, and it's really great. Like, there is a lot of early stage money available. There is huge ambition. Like, the companies that are out there right now, the Rituals, the Wealthsimples, the Leagues, they're cross border from day one, and they're thinking about what they can do, and they have huge ambition. So I think that's awesome. I mean, it's amazing, right? Like, and so I think so back to the point, like, lots of money coming in here, lots of availability. I mean, I think still it's just the long-term thinking. I'm not one to say, oh, Canadian companies sell too soon. I think that's a personal journey for the founder and founders, and B, it's not a bad thing when people can recycle capital and talent into the ecosystem. That's what an ecosystem is. If it was all just giant sharks, you don't have a coral reef. You need that to be eaten and rotating. What do we think we're missing is just more Shopify's, more platform companies that have extremely long-term, persistent vision about a state of the world. And I want to just emphasize the platform part. This is the thing I think people, it's not about the fact that Shopify is big. Of course it's big. It's that millions of people literally have built their businesses on top of this platform. And it's not just the merchants, it's the thousands of apps, right? There are companies that are worth over $1 billion where most of their customer base comes from Shopify, and they were built in the Shopify ecosystem. So it's not just that Shopify is growing, it's that it's helping other entrepreneurs build these huge companies. And frankly, all the way down the spectrum, where you've got happily employed individuals who got 2-person shops and they're making cash flow positive. There's even, I think, an IPO coming up potentially on the TSX, like a reverse ITO of, Andrew Wilkinson out on the West Coast is going to try and roll up a bunch of Shopify apps. That's what a platform company does. That's what people miss. They don't talk enough about it. I don't see people in the Canadian media or press understanding that it's not enough to have big tech companies. It's not enough to have bold tech companies or ambitious dreams. It's that you've got to think about, how do platforms get built? And this is the other part that's really hard to appreciate. Very few platform companies start as platform companies, right? You don't start by saying, we're going to build the best online store platform for people to build apps. Why would I come as an app developer? They only come because that's the best place to find small businesses that are looking to grow. And that required a really great first product. And you can, go from Apple to Microsoft to others, and you just think about classic platform businesses. They first have to be extremely good at aggregating and creating an opportunity set for their first customer, and then opening up so that other customers can come in. It also requires a mindset, right? There's something that Toby and Harley talk about. Harley talks about a lot. It's called the Gates line. And it basically says your partners make more money than you do. And I remember 2 years ago at my very first summit, which is an internal conference, we talked about how Shopify partners were making more money than Shopify. That requires a sort of pie is bigger kind of mindset. It's not about slicing up the pie and if they win, my partner wins, then I lose. No, it's actually like we can all win together if we go after these huge opportunities. So I think that's the kind of mindset, platform thinking, long-term platform thinking, that would be great. And it's hard to find that, but it would certainly be great to have more of that in the country, because that is what really kickstarts ecosystems. And that creates the sustainability.
I think that's a great spot to end off on. Dan, thank you so much for coming on.
Sure.
It's been a great session.
Oh, pleasure. Thanks so much. Keep it up.